any professional accountant coming across a suspected illegal act of whatever sort in the course of their work is a difficult and sensitive time. Whether you're an auditor or a chief financial officer, a consultant giving tax advice, or a junior accountant involved in processing transactions or preparing financial statements, it can often be hard to know what to do for the best. That's partly because of the range of potential issues that might be covered, a very wide range of issues, including matters that are directly related to the financial statements, but also things that are some way away from that direct relationship to the financial statements that we're all so familiar with. In the course of the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, we've been thinking about what the professional accountant should do when he or she comes across breaches of sanctions regimes by banks, for example, money being transferred to regimes like Iran, which are covered very widely by sanctions. What about a professional accountant working for or with an environmental company, a mining company, which is associated with doing serious and illegal damage to the environments in which they're working? Or what about health and safety damage that might be caused by a company manufacturing medical devices? In all of those cases, there's a risk of real harm to not just shareholders, but members of the wider community and to the public. And as Japeth said, a real likelihood that the professional accountant somewhere in that chain will have been aware that something wasn't right. But in every case, the professional accountant has to weigh up a number of different factors. Professional judgment is always required, and it may not always be clear what the professional accountant should best do to serve the public interest. Japeth listed a number of the fundamental principles of our profession, things like integrity, but also confidentiality, and it isn't always clear at what point that duty of confidentiality should be breached for good reason. My experience of responding to fraud and corruption has been earned mainly in government and in public services. For most of my career, I've worked in the United Kingdom and especially in Scotland, where I've been Auditor General since 2012. And I've worked in the Turks and Caicos Islands in the Caribbean, where I was the government's chief financial officer at a time of financial crisis caused in large part by serious corruption. In my experience, the situation in government is reasonably straightforward. There is a clear expectation that the professional accountant will respond robustly and independently when they come across a suspected illegal act or fraud and corruption. And there's an expectation of transparency. For example, as Auditor General, I have clear powers to report financial failures and wrongdoing in public to the Scottish Parliament, and I'm well protected in doing so. I was appointed to my post on the recommendation of the Scottish Parliament by the Queen, and I can only be removed from my post by the Queen if 2/3 of the members of the Scottish Parliament vote in favour of that. That very strong personal protection reflects the fact that I'm auditing public money raised by taxpayers and spent on fundamental public services like education and healthcare that citizens rely on. I recognise, however, and the task force is very aware of this, that the situation is very different in other parts of the world and in other parts of the economy, and that the protections that I take for granted may not always be in place. As Japeth said, at the beginning of this year, I took over as chair of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants Task Force on how professional accountants should respond when they encounter a suspected illegal act in the course of their work. The project's been underway for a while now, and I think it's fair to say that it's one of the most challenging that the board has undertaken. And that challenge reflects the complexity and the sensitivity of the dilemmas that we as accountants face every day, the high level of public interest in this area, especially following the financial crisis, and the importance of us getting the code absolutely right so that it does work in practice as we intend. Our approach has developed over the life of the project. As some of you may know, we issued an exposure draft back in 2012, which focused in on setting a requirement, especially for auditors, to report suspected illegal acts to an appropriate authority. That exposure draft attracted a great number of responses. some in favour of the board's approach, but many others raising legitimate concerns about how it would work in practice and about the scope for unintended consequences that may actually not serve the public interest. In particular, we heard from people who are concerned what would happen if there was no appropriate authority, or if the authority that was in place didn't have a track record of acting on reports, or of doing that fairly and in a balanced way. Concerns about what would happen if the legal framework wasn't in place to investigate properly the reports that were made and to make sure that a fair and just outcome succeeded. And finally, concerns about protection for whistleblowers, about the personal risk that might be attached to professional accountants and their family and friends if they did the right thing and made a report in these circumstances. Since then, we've been considering those responses to ensure that we fully understand them, and also engaging with an unprecedented range of our stakeholders to hear their views. In particular, earlier this year we held 3 roundtable discussions in Hong Kong, Brussels and Washington, bringing together senior people from regulators, investors, audit committees and the profession to explore the issues involved and how the code can best address them. The result was an extremely high-quality debate in each case, which gave the task force some very useful insights. We're now developing a new exposure draft for consultation in 2015, and we think it takes a balanced and practical approach that will lead professional accountants to serve the public interest more effectively in these difficult circumstances. First of all, we tried to clarify what our aim is in this project. It's threefold. First of all, we want to help accountants to comply with the fundamental principles of integrity and professional behaviour on which the code is based when they do encounter a suspected illegal act in the course of their work. Secondly, we want to do what we can to deter management from committing fraud and other illegal acts, and to prompt them to put things right when they do occur, by ensuring that they know professional accountants have a responsibility to act in those circumstances and that they won't simply turn a blind eye. And finally, we want to require the accountant to take further action when that's required, above and beyond what may be required in their own jurisdiction in order to serve the public interest. We're proposing a threefold approach for professional accountants, and this is broadly for all professional accountants, although it will play out differently for accountants in different roles. First of all, the professional accountant will be required to raise the matter with management and those charged with governance, recognising that management always has the primary responsibility for preventing illegal acts and for putting things right when they do occur. Secondly, we're proposing a very clear reminder in the code that the professional accountant must fulfil all their existing professional responsibilities. For example, depending on the nature and the scale of the matter that they've come across, auditors may be required to raise the matter with those charged with governance and to report the matter in their audit report. And we're also very conscious that in many jurisdictions there already are existing legal and regulatory requirements to report to the regulator or to the judicial system when you come across something that's gone wrong. And we hope that those two requirements on professional accountants will deal with most situations that the accountant may come across. However, we do recognise that in some circumstances that's not the case, and our third step is to require the professional accountant to determine if further action is needed to serve the public interest. The action that's required and what's possible will vary depending on each individual set of circumstances, but it may involve, for example, informing the parent company in the case of a group audit, reporting the matter to an appropriate authority where there's no requirement to do so, or resigning from an audit engagement or the employment relationship. We think that's a very robust approach which will take all professional accountants into a strong and structured process of thinking about what the right response is and putting the public interest right at the heart of it. So how will this change behaviours from what already happens? Well, the bar that we intend to set for the professional accountant is a high one. based on the reasonable and informed third-party tests that already runs throughout the code. And the question is basically, would a reasonable and informed third party, weighing all the facts and circumstances, be likely to conclude that the accountant has acted appropriately in serving the public interest? We think having that test in mind will help the accountant to do the right thing and to step back and take a real broad view of the best way of balancing the particular circumstances that they face. Going through that process and documenting it, we hope will also be an aid to logical and principled thinking about what the right thing might be. Overall, we think this approach is rigorous and practical. It recognises the wide range of situations that accountants may encounter and the different environments that they work in right across the world. And it sets a very clear expectation that doing nothing is not an option. Overall, we believe that this addition to the code will lead accountants to serve the public interest more effectively. We're very grateful for the input of everybody who's contributed to the work of the task force and the board so far, and we're looking forward to hearing the views of all our stakeholders as we move to consultation on a new exposure draft early next year. Thank you.